Hello, Alex.
Hi, Sebastian, and everybody welcome and hello to the inaugural conversation we're having.
Yes, great having the first episode with you, Alex, in
Yeah,
this podcast, which we call Toward Autonomy, right, Alex?
I'm excited.
Alex, I'm curious to hear what did you think about the video I posted on my Substack, Perspective Frontiers, and Alex just watched it a few hours earlier and inspired him to give some feedback.
Yeah. My perception and my interpretation of the question, the premise you're starting with is why people on the left who strive to achieve consent and autonomy in a social sphere, why are they more resistant to the same principle, to the same ideas, but within the economic realm, within the economic context? And it's indeed a very interesting question because in many of kind of those kind of writings, you hear people starting from the same, same values, but they come to a very different conclusion, especially when it comes to, and you're talking a lot about it, the economic control and then trying to impose certain rules on the economic life of people. So it's indeed very interesting to understand why people are doing that and why cannot they extend the same kind of thinking, the same thinking in lines of autonomy, consent between adults towards economic activities. I obviously don't have an answer, but maybe at least I can try tentatively put forward some ideas. One of the things that came up for me when I was listening to your video is that there is this idea in existential psychology of basically fear of death and facing death. And some of the reactions, typically neurotic reactions that people are having when they face this death anxiety. And it seems that there is something about that might be relevant in terms of discussing what you are saying. Because, for example, existential psychologist Irvin Yalom, he was talking about two typical reactions that people have to the death anxiety. And one he calls compulsive heroism. It's basically YALOM. He's in the 90s, I think, still alive and very productive. He wrote quite a lot. And he's a great writer, by the way. Like, his writing prose is amazing. So one is very kind of, like, let's say, probably like conservative, right, masculine approaches. Like, how do I face this death anxiety with courage? So basically, I challenge, I climb mountains, I go to the jump with a parachute or stuff like this. And this is a way to avoid facing death by facing.
And that's what you were going to say, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
near-death experience.
yeah. So it's in a way kind of distracting yourself by controlling the kind of fears that you will face in your life. And by doing that, you distract yourself from facing reality the way it is.
So in a way, like the near-death experience is I've seen it, I've done that already. So I'm not so much afraid of the actual thing anymore. Is that a way of understanding this approach? Is there more
In a
to it?
way, I mean, I don't know that much about near-death experience, but what I'm hearing, what I'm listening from, what I know is that people tend to become more relaxed, kind of become more peaceful about death. And I think that's kind of what is the purpose of at least some form of existential psychotherapy is like, how can you face those things without being desperate? Just with acceptance and with the idea that you can enjoy the lifetime that you have rather than trying to avoid it and trying to kind of remove the possibility of death.
Would you count like taking high dosages of LSD or MDMA in a hospice also among those experiences that kind of are close to death experiences, or it's like making your peace with death? I think especially in Switzerland, there's been some experiments at least with MDMA and psilocybin, sorry, in hospices, and they had great successes in like kind of taking away fear of death by feeling usually more connected and one, which in a way sounds okay. I'm in a way confronting death, even though I guess in parts this could also be understood as the motherly counterpart, right? To the jumping out of a plane to feel close to death.
Yeah, and that's the second way to approach the death anxiety is by turning to some kind of a savior. So there is some kind of ultimate power in the world to which you basically submit yourself so that it takes care of you, and that's a different I would say probably more feminine way of distracting yourself from a death anxiety. And this ultimate savior can take different forms. It can definitely take the form of religion. So basically, you relate to some kind of deity and you almost form a pact with this deity. I do the kind of things that the holy writing tells me
Mm.
and save my soul, give me the life after death. Or more mundanely, it could be the state, because I think in modern times, state takes a lot of the same kind of psychological dynamics. So basically, I pay taxes and you take care of me. So kind of an infantile position, as if someone passes the law, it's going to make me safe. Almost like the existence of regulation creates some kind of a safe world for us, which is not the case. It's only a distraction.
To maybe complete this thought chain, which would get this position quite close to my original comment on politics, kings, and even in democracy nowadays, parentification. Here, if you see religion as also kind of a parental infantilization structure, you even say father, right, in the church,
Yeah, yeah.
and how religion was married to the state for a long time. And then religion kind of broke down as having so much force on people, being able presumably also to control them. Then like those crazy ideologies took over, right? Horrendous times, Stalin, Mao, and so on. Nowadays, we're also talking about, I guess, as I mentioned, like, for example, paternalism, right? Or in Germany, the Chancellor Angela Merkel being called Mutti even, right? Which seems to be, I want to be parentified complex, which I always thought quite off-putting, but most people find that comforting. So what do you think that is, or why do you think that is? Is it immaturity? Is it being afraid of real life? Is it a certain emotional laziness? I want to be protected. I don't want to take responsibility.
Mhm.
Kind of running back to mommy in a way.
Yeah, and I think that that's very natural thing for all of us. I don't know, maybe some people will deny that and say they don't have this need. And I'm not very psychoanalytically oriented, but in that school of thought, they will talk a lot about almost this biblical experience of leaving the Eden. So you are born in the world, the ultimate safety of the womb is broken, and now you are in this totality of the world against you, and you need to deal with that. And it's obvious that on some level, our psyche, at least according to the psychoanalyst, is trying to go back to ultimate safety. I think that it's normal to be afraid because the world is immense and unpredictable. But I think what's important is what we're doing with this state of being scared. Because one thing is to try to repress it or to find some kind of workaround to remove it rather than accepting that that's the reality. I am bound to be not necessarily continuously, not necessarily, in a sheer terror, but still, it's normal to be afraid. And when we are able to accept that, it's basically letting go of control. And you mentioned a lot control, right? But like when we try to deal with this way in terms of like we are not accepting the fear, we need to do something about it. That's when we create neurotic control. And I think that neurotic control is also leading to some kind of central planning, more regulation, create safety for us in an
Yeah.
artificial way.
I think, I mean, I don't know. Three things came to my mind when you talked about this. Maybe just throwing them in pretty quickly. In a way, it sounds like surrender. I don't know if that's something interesting to follow up on now. Another one, almost everyone seems to be a control freak who is like in favor of the state, and most people are, right? The things that are manipulated, the idea to bring even the economy in homeostasis in an equilibrium the whole time, right? As if it would be a huge living being, and always having to control it if things are like slightly off from your ideal. And I guess another one where is about avoidance. And in the last months, I again and again thought maybe the most important distinguisher between people who are successful and have an upward trajectory in the world and who don't is whether they're avoidant or not. And even from people who have a hard time, traumatic experience in their childhood, people who are not avoidant just grow, right? And always have a better life. It's almost like when they're children, you don't see that so much, but I guess it's like interest of interest, right? They're just investing continuously and
Mhm.
become like terms of character, what their life turns out to be very rich. And others who are avoiding always, like kind of just go the other trajectory.
Mm.
They pay a burden, they take debt all the time. But at some point, the interest repayments, that burden kind of crushes them. And when they are 40, their life lies in disasters and kind of shells broken, right? And when you talk about, well, I want to go back to my parents, I have that impulse. Do you think there's maybe an important divide between avoiders and confronters or
Mm.
something like that?
It's interesting because I think it's also, the dynamics of being reactive. It can show up in a different way. So sometimes, even though on the surface, maybe it's not seemingly so, but sometimes the rebels are also avoiders. So it's more like, the kind of example I typically think of is if my parents want me to be a doctor,
Mm,
I can submit to the authority
mm.
and become a doctor, or I can rebel and become, let's say, film director or lawyer. But in both situations, I'm reactive because more emergent thing would be to step back and say, okay, my parents want this, but what do I want?
Yes, I guess it's important to qualify avoiding what, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of it's becoming more like away from rather than towards something.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking of avoiding psychologically your inner tension
Mm.
or avoiding
Yeah.
to face problems, running away from them. So of course you can also say avoiding confrontation. Confronting someone can be, of course, in some way being avoidant. But avoiding your problems, avoiding things that are standing in your life where you feel off, where you run away, where you just maybe start patterns to not face something.
Yeah. And I think that like probably topic that we can explore someday is the difference between freedom from and freedom to, because that also could be freedom from could be a way of almost being stuck in avoiding something, which not necessarily bad, but kind of it's not holistic, it's not fulfilling.
Yeah, well, I hesitated a bit here. In the beginning, I thought this distinction is actually a fruitful one.
Huh?
But more about it, I think it's bullshit.
Okay. Tell me more.
Because freedom too means like kind of having more possibilities, right? But kind of wanting to say like you have more freedom too. So logically, there's infinitely many things you could do, right? And you're always constrained by laws in nature. Without that constraint, you could even not act at all. So the constraints kind of allow you to
Yeah.
act. And so using this as a measure, trying to like kind of this new liberal idea to give more chances to someone, it's kind of a problematic concept because there is no floor. The freedom from, at least politically, socially, you have Robinson Crusoe being the freest person, right? As long as Montag, I guess, right? I always confuse those two.
Uh,
But as long as he's alone on the island, right? He's not socially restrained. And the freedom too is like kind of pretty much standing in front of a room of endless possibilities. And which one you choose to be important is subjective, right? It's a value judge. So I'm a bit allergic because I usually feel that freedom too is just like kind of a rhetoric trick to make people buy into whatever you want.
mm,
And there's infinite possibilities. It's like there is no there's no proper measurement of
mhm.
what you can do. But maybe you've
Yeah.
a more positive outlook on this.
I guess, in a way, that's a very practical question for me because, like, in the kind of work that I do, I talk with people about their aspirations, about their goals. And, like, in a coaching session today, I was talking about, like, someone who doesn't want to be afraid, which is like, I want to be free from fear,
Hmm.
which is a kind of a like away from formulation. And then typically it's useful to explore and what you would like to have instead of that. So like, being able to envision the kind of state or the kind of goal that people want rather than like, I don't want to be employed, I want to be an entrepreneur. Kind of like both different perspective on the same situation, on the same outcome they want to achieve, but like typically it engages people in a different way. So I tend to think about freedom from and freedom to also in this way.
Mm.
Almost like, sometimes people are so stuck in this, like, I hate taxes.
Yeah.
And like, I want to be free from taxes. And
Yes.
it's a valid concern, but also like, but
Sounds lost, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I guess in this sense makes more sense. I mean, I looked at it from a justification perspective where it's often
Uh-huh.
used in politics, and there I think it's just arbitrary. It doesn't make sense. I guess where it can make sense, I guess how you formulated it is, well, instead of thinking just about the things that annoy you, like the hurdles, I guess the freedom too would be, well, what do I try to achieve? And what are the hurdles in the way? Because the first two sounds a bit lost, right? Or out of touch.
Yeah.
Things that annoy me, but I kind of don't have a clear vision about where I want to
Yeah.
go, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this kind of gives you priorities, what's the most important hurdles to get rid of, I guess.
And the kind of thing which is related to this dynamic, but a bit more complex, is that kind of a pattern of postponed life. I will start doing the things that I want to when the kids grow up, I retire, I have enough money.
Yeah. So talking about those psychological profiles, what would you say to come back to the original
Mhm.
question? What do you think is the usual thing with contemporary left? And again, talking about the authentic ones, right? I mean, there's people who say they're for social freedom, but then they put political correctness out there, which is a rule set to oppress and regulate others, offended by everything and use that as a means to coerce and power, right? But I mean, maybe leave those things aside and take like someone who's really well meaning, right? And among those contemporary left, I often find or more easily find people who are socially very open and curious and permissive, which I feel it's like giving a lot of autonomy and also themselves exploring many fields and being open, you being whatever way. But then being so permissive and kind of libertarian. And that's also how libertarianism is sometimes paraphrased, right? Taking the openness and the permissiveness in the social sphere from the left
Yeah.
and the economic openness and
Best
permissiveness,
of the two worlds.
right? Yeah. And then you get libertarians. And it's kind of weird. I mean, of course, we can also talk about the right, but I guess the left is maybe more approachable.
Mm.
I feel the modern right gets more permissive on the social side and is overall maybe often closer, even though they're maybe protectionist or something.
Mhm.
That doesn't go along so well with anarchist libertarian ideas and visual anarchist libertarian ideas. But yeah, so those leftists that have those strong difference, and afterwards maybe we can still talk about them, right? But from a psychological perspective, or maybe thinking of friends
Mhm.
or acquaintances, what do you think it is, or why do you think this breaks down, or maybe where does this openness come from?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I wrote in my notes, is that at least my hypothesis that came up when I was listening to your video is that I feel that it has to do with what we accept or repress in us. For example, one of the frames that I tend to use is like, who am I able to be generous with? Because then it's typically, it's at least, like in social media, you can see that people have biases and prejudices. And like people on the left, they would be more generous and considerable with certain kind of narratives and themes and topics and communities, and they will be against others. And people on the right have their own preferences.
It's a tribal empathy guided thing or sympathy guided thing. I like those people, so I'm permissive, or I like certain behaviors, even socially. Of course, you could think, what, so even those socially very permissive leftists would maybe not like if you have threat behavior or like man, give each other some bullshit and be
Yeah.
to each other and a bit mean.
Yeah.
That's something that's usually not not permitted, right? Those even more authentic, open leftist circles. So maybe it is, right, just a certain sphere of social permissiveness. And maybe I don't know. I try to be as considerate to the other side as possible, right? To see the kind of the strongest version, the opponent, and then to understand, okay, not thinking they're like stupid or just incompetent or and then just to try to properly understand them, because I think that's valuable before engaging in a discussion with someone to kind of get the grasp the best version of themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, like what I feel is relevant is this Jungian idea of shadow. And I think if you think about the economic activity, and archetypically the economic activity is to go hunting. So it's like aggressive energy. You go out, you fetch the game,
Yes.
and it's a form of aggression and
Or collect
something.
berries,
Yeah,
right? Which is not
yeah.
as aggressive.
Yeah, but still, it's kind of going and out there. It's active, and I think that I cannot escape this comparison. But like this masculine, feminine, yin yang thing. So, for example, if people lean more towards this kind, gentle, caring part, but they suppress more aggressive, active part, then certain kind of things they will repress in themselves. And per Jung, they will turn kind of a judge in others as well. And on the other hand, like if those people who are economically active, like uh, cutthroats, businessmen, they kind of suppress in themselves the caring part, the kind part, the gentle part, and they will judge this in those kind of hippies, lefties, whatever, tree huggers.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in a way, it would be maybe a too permissive view to say that actually leftists are um, truly open or permissive or pro autonomy in those areas. They're not pro autonomy, even though they sometimes say that. They would be pro well, what I find sympathetic, right? Which seems to be a much more proto theoretical
Uh,
um, stance, or somewhat sounds not very sophisticated. And but then most people would be, oh, I find this sympathetic, I allow it. I don't find it sympathetic, or like I have a unreflected, presumably, repulsion against something. So I want this to be forbidden. It sounds very animalistic thing, right? It's like
yeah,
almost this thing's forbidden, this smells good. Let's have that, and everyone should have that.
yeah. But also, what's interesting, in therapeutic work or coaching as well, it could happen when people are more permissive inside of them, they become more permissive outside of them. So the more tolerant we become to the parts that we have, to the different impulses that are arising in us, the more we can tolerate outside of us.
But do you think it's plausible to then say, well, libertarians and the individual anarchists just did more work on themselves? They don't repress something in themselves that much, or they're like maybe made friends. So I guess Jung talked about um, finding your anima, or the female side, as a man, and the other way around for a
Mhm.
woman. Which sounds a bit like, oh, this tough man side, and then I make friends with my female side and maybe incorporate both sides and be permissive towards both. Do you think that's something that happens to many libertarians, or is that one reason? There's many different kinds of libertarians or individual anarchists or people on that spectrum.
Feel so. I feel so. I mean, it's obviously just like partially just patting yourself on the back,
Yeah.
but I think it's a sign of maturity how much in the world out there we can tolerate. The more narrow our vision, the more narrow our like window for toleration, probably it indicates that there's something with us. And obviously, world is very complicated. There's a lot of evil in it, but there's a lot of beautiful things. And like, how much can we tolerate both of them? How can we be open to the experience around ourselves and the experience within us? Maybe there is some kind of correlation between being more open to both social and economic freedoms and some kind of maturity. Because sometimes in this, I mean, I'm not part of it, but reading the books and observing it, New Age community, people who are into spirituality, yoga, meditation, sometimes one half of the brain or whatever individuality is developed, but very rigid in some other aspects. I don't know, sex, money.
Yeah. I mean, I want to make that comment earlier when you talked about avoidance and rigidity, maybe a comment I made before in personal conversation, reminded me again of Camus' philosophical suicide, right? Like following up also to the freedom to and freedom from idea. I
Uh,
found this very well expressed, because a philosophical suicide is, for example, I want to free myself from fear,
mhm.
but I become less free to things because I get myself into that rigid framework. So I'm free myself from something by becoming very rigid.
Mm.
I can become free too, very permissive, at least more permissive, right? By not doing this and becoming an absurdist philosopher like Camus, right? It's an invitation to say, well, I kind of accept this absurdity or accept this fear, right? Make peace with it.
Mm.
Um, and just embrace all of it without going for any rigidity, like holding on to one doctrine and just ignoring all the incoherence.
Yeah, nice. There was also something I wanted to ask you. I'm curious about this thing that you are talking about, the idea of choosing the parents. I'm curious if you can elaborate on that.
Maybe just one remark before,
Sure.
because I just remembered it. Maybe just short remark to the libertarians who maybe kind of mature. I think there is this times of libertarians and individual anarchists, but I guess there could be also other reasons why you maybe are in that spectrum, right? I guess what about someone who's out of touch with all their components, right? Or all their sides? Just wondering, would they then just be misanthropic and hate themselves? Or would they also lean into being permissive towards everything? Or people who maybe had a trauma of being really oppressed when they grew up and just wanting freedom? Um,
Mm.
just wondering, of course, would be lovely if every libertarian would just be someone mature who worked through their shit and who kind of did Jungian shadow work.
Mm.
I just wanting to remark, presumably there's a wide range of reasons why someone would kind of favor such a position, right? Or be attracted to such a position. Typical, you also meet types that are having slightly autistic traits, for example, right? Where you think, okay, there's a certain correlation. Maybe that's what I also suggested in the video. Can it be that some people don't get certain things and that's the reason, why
Mm.
they're overly permissive, or they don't have that feel for the social, they don't feel so much connected to people, so they just want to be left alone, right? You could think there's this loners, which would maybe
Mm.
explain why there's also a lot of autistic leaning people, and that might not be the only reason, right? People also develop over time, but not feeling connected to anyone and just wanting to be left alone, being eremite almost, could also be a reason to lean towards these positions.
But I think that there is also like extreme asocial behavior. I don't know, people robbing banks, raping, killing. Not necessarily mafia, because I think kind of mobsters also have certain kind of social structure that they rely on. But like, I feel like people who both lack discipline and kindness, probably the kind of people who will end up in some kind of organized crime or government.
Libertarians, though?
Huh?
Are they also libertarians?
I don't know. I remember that there was a weird article. I'm not sure whether it has any truth to it. A libertarian tried psychedelics, and after having psychedelic experience, he could not continue being libertarian. And I said, like, why? No, but like the premise was as if he was like so, this kind of cutthroat
Yeah.
individual, rugged individual, selfish person. And after psychedelic experience, he quit being selfish person, and therefore quit being libertarian. And I'm thinking, what's
Didn't
the fuck
happen
is the
for me.
connection? You don't need to hate people to be libertarian, for those who are listening us. And
No, I feel even more like, and I mean, I just have the suspicion there can be different reasons why people favor the same outcomes. And I feel especially individual anarchists, libertarian camps often offer a huge panel of different individuals. It's a
mm,
very heterogeneous group. And like from a character level, I sometimes get along better with people outside, right? The libertarian space, because I guess there's some rogue kind of asshole characters, I'd say,
yeah,
that show this asocial behavior or just want to be left alone and do their things. And for them, maybe this might change when they're feeling more connected, right? Their position might change, or the reasons for being it might change. But it feels made up that would experience would change that much, but maybe just trying to push the idea, well, which I feel though is not being considerate with the opposite side, right? Taking the weakest kind of motivation and people who have
Yeah.
maybe just asocial assholes or don't care about others or don't feel any connection, which might be sometimes also the autistic type. And that's the reason why they're anarchist or libertarian. And I feel that's why maybe those bloody hard, being hard, right? Libertarians are interesting because there's a type of caring people who understand things, who are connected, who are not autistic, not assholes, who are also libertarian, right? And I guess that's the interesting type maybe to look at. And that's maybe
Yeah.
also something to follow up on in this podcast. So I feel that's a
Yeah.
strong position. And a lot of the opponent often just tries to get rid of anarchist positions or libertarian positions by saying they're crazy, they're assholes, they're
Yeah. Yeah.
just they don't get social processes.
And like as you're saying, like within the libertarian community, there's like whole spectrum or like whole, I don't know, multitude of different type of ways of thinking of things. Basically, like there are obviously like left libertarians or paleo libertarians who are very different in their style. Like ones will be more closer to basically conservatives, maybe almost indistinguishable. Others would be almost indistinguishable from people on the left.
Yeah. Yeah, even though hopefully not on their positions. Otherwise, it sounds like a mislabel. Because I feel, and that's maybe a point.
I think you know it's also interesting how people construct different narratives. So some people will say like America is the perfect state who really strive for individual liberty, and people will say, well, they also killed Native Americans, which kind of both true, but like it's interesting how we choose the facts to stitch our narratives from,
cherry
and that's kind of sorry.
cherry picking.
Yes, yes. And that's what I mean by like what parts of narratives we are generous to or what communities we are generous to and what we are not. So we decide like, okay, this is not crucial. This we put aside. But actually genociding people who are living there is not probably that great. And same with big business, right? Some people are quite permissive, I don't know how to say, like quite positive towards corporation, business world. And there are libertarians who are kind of quite skeptical of that, like big pharma, big tech, these kind of things. And there
Sure,
are
but they
like,
do together, right?
you know,
So if you're skeptical of the current big pharma, most libertarians would agree as they speak of crony capitalism
yes,
or corporativism, where they say, well, those that are married to the state, that is political power, that's not a free market.
hmm
And I guess it depends whether you're maybe seeing more the positive side of the current company, thinking they're mostly free markets, though this company kind of bit married to the state, or saying, well, they're mostly the state, and that's well behaved.
yeah, yeah. And that's the relevant argument here, right? But some people will try to almost like sweep it under the carpet. And same with unions, right? If union is in bed with the government,
Yes,
which is kind of crony unionism, it's
yes.
one thing. If there are like spontaneously organized consenting adults forming unions, actually kind of hard to.
Yeah, that's very libertarian model, right? Because I just had that conversation with someone saying, "Oh, you presumably don't like unions. Unions are a great thing if it's voluntary, right? So the if you think back in the industrialist times, yeah, I mean, get together, a group of 20, and just do a negotiation as a group, right? Just not great as soon as you get people with guns in and start forcing people, right? And having a not voluntary, like
Yeah,
crony version of it. But I feel whether they call themselves paleo libertarian or I don't even remember the other term you said,
left
left
libertarian.
libertarians. Always think a bit weird those labels because I mean, say there should be some issues and maybe a certain position you defend and getting clear on what the position is. I mean, one suggestion I had in this video was, and I guess if you ask a follow-up question to that, that mark of libertarians and individual anarchists is denying this position. Okay, in politics, we should parentify others or infantilize others. Would say a mark of all those libertarians, if they call themselves libertarians, should at least be something like, well, we don't want to tell others what to do, parentify them, kind of force parentify them. And that's where maybe my suggestions, you can choose your own parents comes in. And choosing your own parents, think of like in a mild version, you can choose mentors, right? and kind of submit to a mentor.
Mhm.
It's like kind of can be like kind of a guarding father figure in a certain domain.
Mhm.
But you can also say, well, I'm free, but I want to submit to a religion freely on voluntary terms, have maybe the pastor being a father, or join into like, I guess, related Bible state constructs, but on voluntary terms. And that's simply what I meant by
Mhm.
choosing parents, right? Just having easier possibility to just live here, want to exit, and I can have certain parents if I want to, but can live autonomously otherwise, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's still a kind of an autonomy. Part of autonomy is also being able to give up your autonomy.
Yeah, this is a question very relevant to me because one of those topics I'm very interested in is like how do you map the connection between being a libertarian and leadership style? Because on some level, if it is basically the form of again agreement, mutual agreement between consenting adults, but I'm thinking if a leader or a manager or business owner who is a libertarian is also very authoritarian or micromanaging, is
Yeah.
he really or she really is a libertarian? So that's kind of a dilemma for me. Like, can you be authoritarian in economic relationships and still be libertarian? Because for me, it feels like libertarian kind of must be not controlling others, not.
Yes. Because libertarianism or individual anarchism is not the description of a character. I mean, especially not. You could say maybe in contrast to the left position or to the right position, this is radically different because it says, well, I want to have the autonomy and give others the autonomy. So there's maybe empirically a certain correlation between that kind of person. But as we already discussed, there's quite an heterogeneous group of different people who were libertarians. And I guess you can have very different ideas both about what's effective leadership or personal inclinations. So, I mean, I would find that maybe a certain style more sympathetic myself.
Uh-huh.
You can maybe think, well, someone who's libertarian to the outside, you would think is more libertarian, in their family or in their business. But yeah, I don't think that's necessary or even empirically. I think it's just a certain subgroup.
Mm.
Maybe people who are more like bleeding art libertarians maybe have a certain inclination, but otherwise there's a big range of motivations and characters that might be drawn to the position.
Uh.
But but I mean, do you have like some more? That's more a theoretical response, I guess. Do you have more practical experience with that?
Not really. It's still kind of more and more theoretical exploration, and I'm trying to read the books which are written by people who are libertarian and business people at the same time, so kind of explore their modality of thinking. But also, like I feel this again, it's more like a neo-Freudian idea, but
They
like
might be
how
more curious, right? Or more open or curious.
yeah. It's like the idea about like how strong is my ego, and for example, or self ego in a good sense, ego structure. For example, like if I'm trying to dissolve my ego because like the world is too dangerous, I need to dissolve, I need to merge with others, which is basically like form of collectivism.
Yes.
Or the opposite of that is that I'm trying, like, I still have a weak ego, but my response is different and I'm trying to, merge others into my ego. So I try to dominate, I try to be almost,
Absorbing.
yes, yes. So kind of, it's the same symptom, or it's the same, how to say, kind of the same problem people are dealing with. Like my ego is not strong enough, but in a different way. Like one way is to dissolve it, and other is to try to strengthen it by incorporating others into it. So
And what's
that's kind of, at least for me, that's kind of, it seems like that's the source of being authoritarian in a
okay?
political sense, but also in a business sense.
So the two ways to be authoritarian, one is which I got, like absorbing the other is pretty much everyone has to do what I do, right? And what's the other one? The other one didn't sound authoritarian at first.
It's not authoritarian, but what I'm saying is like both are stemming from having some kind of impaired and not totally integrated ego.
Oh, so one is like completely being extremely controlling and the other one is being completely laissez-faire.
Yes. Not laissez-faire, but more like, submitting to others.
Okay, so the one is controlling others and telling others what to do. The other extreme is being completely submissive to
Yeah,
others.
yeah, yeah. Or a more dramatic way to put it is sadist and masochist.
Is that the same though? Trolling is someone who wants to control a sadist?
Well, at least that's how it can be described.
Yeah. But I mean, isn't sadist someone who takes pleasure in the pain of others? But controlling someone else or wanting to control someone else, not necessarily taking pleasure in the pain of others, right?
So, like, yeah, in this sense, it's more about like how you submit others to yourself. But yeah, being authoritarian is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Also, there, like, if you, I mean, the obvious association, of course, like sexual, right? So
Mm,
in the sexual space, you could think, well, there is kind of a voluntary
yeah.
submission or voluntary control, maybe always to be called sadism, but well, in those forms, is this successful shadow work, allowing both sides to voluntarily come through?
Yeah, and I think in a way, it could be a deliberate, mature choice rather than kind of neurotic need that people have.
Yeah.
And probably that's the healthy kind of work relationship where there's a leader who holds such a strong vision that you basically become employed by this leader to help them make this vision come true. So that's normal way of being with people, working with
So
people.
there's kind of this convincing guru who doesn't have to tell anyone to follow him, but people are like so curious or he's so charismatic and exciting that people. So Jesus had the best leadership style.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, there's some ideas from Tao Te Ching as well. Like, best leaders are the ones where people say we did it.
Pardon, they say, I didn't.
So there's like a verse in Tao Te Ching, basically like bad leaders is like when people say we did it in spite of them.
Mm, oh,
Like the mediocre ones are like our leader helped us, and the best leaders is when people say we did it.
we did it. Okay, not
Mhm.
because of them, but just feeling
Yeah, so kind of
aligned, right?
more like facilitating the environment where people can achieve things on their own.
So having a sense we're just a team and, you know, follow the same vision. And best service is when you don't notice you're serviced, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Similarly, what you would say best leader is that you don't notice you're led. Even though that can, I guess, when you talk about leadership, it's kind of a connotation of being manipulative, right? I didn't notice I'm led, but sounds almost like I've been brainwashed.
yeah. I don't like the word that much, to be honest, because it presupposes some kind of superiority, or almost presupposes superiority.
Yeah, but I guess you want to have some voluntary submission, right? In this case, if you knew what happened, you still want the person to say, yeah, that's okay, right? I mean, I'm just convinced now, right? Or feel that's like kind of that gives me meaning or that's worth pulling on
Mm.
one string, just feel aligned or team or enriched.
So there's one thing about parenting that I also wanted to add, and probably mindful of time, maybe we can then find a way to like. There's this idea, and I think it's especially strong. Well, I think it's everywhere. For example, it's very strongly, explicitly expressed in the internal family system psychotherapy, becoming your own caretaker. So I think that that's something like you almost alluded to, like I mean, mentor is one form, but also like almost like how can I stop looking for this external force?
Yes.
How can I let go of my own infantilism, and how can I become, and they talk about self-leadership in the IFS community. So basically, like, how can I be my own CEO or the leader of my life, or like manage the community of the cognitive processes that exist in my mind. So that what resonated with me, because and then in transactional analysis they talk about different ego states, being
Yeah.
parent, child, and adult. So it's
Yeah.
more like how can we quit those parent-child dynamics and start being adults, and then interacting with others as adults as well. Because I think that's kind of where point of maturity is, like, how can I stop treating everything as a kid and try to control their life?
I think it's interesting to draw parallels to how you live or build romantic relationships. And I think, interestingly, for example, in the US, I guess there's a big focus on, hey, the next one that becomes president should have a functional family, right?
Mm.
Which is almost this idea, right? You have to be maybe proper dad or mom
Uh-huh.
to be even appropriate candidate to become a president.
Mm.
I feel so in a romantic relationship, it is today psychological constants to say in a romantic relationship to fall into parental structures is not healthy. Right? It's kind of
Yes.
toxic. So if one just gets the role of the mother and the other of the child, or one of the father and the other one of the daughter or something, that's not a healthy relationship then, right? It might be interesting to play with those things again in the sexual sphere, but that's more reflected and a game. Um, but in a romantic relationship, you still want to have maybe, I think, motherly and fatherly kinds of love, right? So without being mother or father. So like a relationship where you have nurture and support, right? Seems to be a good romantic relationship, but without having that childhood dependence or codependency, which is also
Yeah.
one of the big buzzwords about bad relationship nowadays. And maybe it reflects well, like being able to show this kind of love, but receiving and giving it in a not dependent, childlike way. So there's kind of a maturity, I feel, of receiving and giving motherly or fatherly love that it can, of course, sometimes be role in inverse, right? That's just the archetype of love. But that doesn't happen in a parentifying infantilization kind of way. Having this idea that in relationships where you care, also towards friends. Usually you can say especially where it's not just transactional, you get forms of, which is, I guess, caring relationships, you get forms of this motherly or fatherly love archetypes, how you deal with your friends. And that can be more the one or more the other at sometimes. So I guess the typical motherly love thing would be to give emotional space and right to support and nurture them. And fatherly love would be like setting together and pushing you to get out on the street again, even though you're depressed, and push you to solve things and
Mm.
maybe borrow you some money, but try to help you solve things, right? Finding solutions. So I guess it's typically archetypical man friendship kind of thing. And I feel like it's hard to find even other forms of social human interaction than those archetypical motherly love, fatherly love things. And yeah, that was interesting for me in the thought process. I mean, it's kind of an open thought process, ideas about it, but feeling there's maybe even a parallel about this parentifying idea of politics and how mature your relationships are and how well maybe you can apply that in politics or even like voluntarily in business relationships, right? Where you could say this is maybe business relationships is also kind of a actionable project like politics, but here it's more on free
Mm.
voluntary terms. So you also like doing something together and maybe you have relationships with people and ideally they are maybe not just transactional, but leadership involves maybe giving some kind of parental love, like kind of those
Yeah.
archetypes of motherly and fatherly love. And in the best way, functionally, they should be matured, right? Maturely received and maturely given.
Yeah. And like circling back to what I said in the beginning is that this idea of ultimate savior, I mentioned like government, religion, these are the obvious things, but also it can play out the same dynamic with work, with being employed. I put so many expectations on my employment as if my company should take care of my life and deliver me from all the suffering that exists in the world. Or similarly, it could be about a romantic relationship, right? I meet this magical other, as James Hollis named it, like this magical other that will make love possible in my life and will give me all the prizes of this world, which is also too much to expect from another human being.
Yeah, it sounds like a narcissist idealization, right? Then you're just having a relationship not with a human, but with a narcissistically idealized, imagined other, almost imagined partner or projections. That seems to be almost like this close to that codependency. Avoiding to figure things out yourself. And maybe there's also a big connection between maturity and not
Yeah.
avoiding things, not being avoidant, right? Because otherwise it's easy to, yeah, feel, okay, I don't figure out my life. And the solution is to throw myself into a relationship and
Yeah.
to demand the other to fill all those gaps.
Yeah. And exactly like one of the signs of maturity is being able to be with complexity, with things which are not resolved yet. Because typically, like when we face uncertainty or too big of complexity, we're trying to, almost not immediately, but we try to resolve it quickly to something simple,
Yes, that's like this
black
modern,
and white.
yeah, this modernism flaw, right? Where things are usually broken down to a few knots to turn.
Mm,
Even the modern Keynesianism, right? It's like we turn a few knobs. It's like complex
yeah,
system. We just steered the way we
yeah,
wanted. More building top-down cities or forests, like kind of
exactly.
having this idea you can just change a few things and control it. It's also kind of a control freak idea, almost feel. You just, what did you say before? Oh, um, do you think, how likely is it that we as a society, or most of us, reach maturity level sufficient to be autonomous or choose our own parents?
I don't know, but I think that's why we are here. That's the purpose to reach our individual maturity, or at least it's part of our purpose in life. At least to try that. That's my
Self-chosen
guess.
purpose. Yeah, mission.
But I think there is something, and you mentioned like psychological education. Obviously, like next generation has its own. Each next generation has its own kind of flaws, biases, or stupid ideas. But also, there is something. I'm not sure how true is that IQ is also rising. The hate, average hate of human beings is also rising. But also, I think like psychological maturity, like each generation is rising, and probably even this idea that how they call Gen Z or whatever, they are tolerating employment less and less. So they already have some kind of built-in almost insurance against this type of work collectivism.
Or it's just the rising government benefits that incentivize them
Or
not to
or
work.
yeah, or that as well.
Yeah, any ideas about maybe some thoughts you want to share about a path that comes to your mind? I guess also I shared the idea which you mentioned again of psychological progress, which is actually something that's quite big in woke movements. What can we do to move the whole society towards a more mature society?
Well, I think genuine dialogue with respect, it's definitely helpful. At least if we look at the opposite, which is like name calling or trying to rationalize things, like just, trying to argue with facts is not necessarily working. So I think coming down to the values, and in terms of shared values, probably we can find a lot of mutual values. And like free cities is a big thing for me in terms of giving me hope that we can have pockets of different experiments and different communities who genuinely care for certain values experimenting with stuff.
Yeah.
And then we can see and learn together what's working, what's not working, and being curious and being respectful, kind. I mean, critical where it needs to be, but not in a vicious way, or not in a way like you're saying, just treating people as stupid when they disagree with us.
Yeah, that's what at least I'm trying to do here, and maybe somewhat a hope to achieve with this podcast. To don't rationalize things, don't just use theory to protect yourself, but have a
Mm,
honest dialogue and maybe try to achieve to move society to a more mature next step. I mean, I would love to see more competition in the free city space. Would love to
yeah,
actually want to see some leftists showing us that socialism works.
yeah.
Curious to see many of those experiments, as long as they're like
Mhm.
all about voluntary participation.
So how should we wrap up our first episode?
Thank you, Alex, for joining me today and for the great thoughts, not only follow-up thoughts, but new thoughts we can follow up in the future you shared today. I'm looking forward to having more of such conversations in the future with you. And if you or any of you listeners have an idea of who could be a great candidate on the authentic left that maybe wants to join the podcast in the future and share some of their thoughts, what they actually think, would be much appreciated, and I think would contribute a lot to having a more rich dialogue on that topic.
Thank you, Sebastian, as well. I'm looking forward to see what emerges from our idea to collaborate and create this podcast. And to our listeners, we are learning, so we would be open to hear what you're noticing, what kind of topics you want to you want us, what direction this podcast will take. It's probably influenced by you as well, your listeners.
Yeah, please, listeners, don't just be passive. Involve us in a lively conversation, and I'm looking forward to your comments, ideas, and feedback too.
Take care.
Take care.